The auctioneer's gavel cracked against the wooden block like a gunshot, and Seraphine's heart shattered with it. "Sold to the gentleman with the silver spurs for $300. Barnabas Wickham's voice boomed across the packed square of Whisper Creek, his tobacco-stained teeth gleaming as he counted his commission. Silas Thornwick stepped forward, his black duster trailing behind him like Death's shadow. At 45, the mysterious drifter had the weathered face of a man who'd seen too much and felt too little. Silver streaked his dark hair, and his pale blue eyes held the coldness of winter frost as they assessed his newest acquisition. But Serafina wasn't looking at her new owner. Her emerald gaze was locked on the young man standing behind the crowd, his face a mask of anguish that mirrored her own breaking heart. Lysander Vale's golden hair caught the morning sunlight like spun wheat, and even from this distance, she could see the tears threatening to spill from his amber eyes. "Come along, girl," Silas commanded, his voice gravelly from years of whiskey. "And cigarettes? Time to see your new home?" Seraphine's legs trembled as she stepped down from the auction platform, her father's gambling debts having sealed her fate just as surely as if she'd been sentenced to hang. 3 months ago, she'd been the belle of Whisper Creek, daughter of the respected banker Mortimer Blackthorne. Now she was chattel, sold to pay for her father's weakness at the poker table, as Silas gripped her elbow with surprising gentleness. Serafina caught one last glimpse of Lysander. He worked at her father's former estate, now owned by the cruel cattle baron Jedediah, grim tending the horses with a skill that bordered on magic. For 2 years, they'd stolen moments together in the stables, sharing dreams of a future that now lay in ashes. "Please," she whispered to Silas as he led her toward his black stallion. "Let me say goodbye." Silas followed her gaze to the golden-haired young man whose hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Something flickered in the drifter's cold. Eyes recognition, perhaps, or memory of his own lost love? "Make it quick," he said gruffly. "We've got riding to do before dark." Serafina rushed to Lysander, and he caught her in his arms as if she were made of precious glass. "This isn't over," he whispered fiercely against her hair. "I'll find a way to free you. I swear it." "Oh." Seraphine's voice broke. "You have nothing, and I belong to him now." Lysander pulled back to cup her face in his work-roughened hands. "You belong to no one but yourself. And I'll prove it if it's the last thing I do." Their lips met in a desperate kiss that tasted of salt, tears, and shattered dreams. When they broke apart, Silas was standing beside them, his expression unreadable. "Time's up," he said, but there was no cruelty in his tone. As they rode out of Whisper Creek, Serafina twisted in the saddle to watch Lysander until he was nothing more than a golden speck in the distance. She didn't know that he was already planning, already scheming, already preparing for the impossible. Behind them, Jedediah Grimm emerged from the saloon where he'd been watching the auction, his cruel smile stretching across his scarred face. He'd had his eye on both Serafina and the stable boy for months, and now fate had delivered them both into his web of schemes. Silas. Thornwick's ranch sat in a valley 20 miles from Whisper Creek, hidden behind a wall of pine trees and bitter memories. The house was well built but cold, like its owner, all function and no warmth. As he helped Serafina down from his horse, she noticed how the other hands avoided his gaze, going about their work with the nervous efficiency of men who'd learned not to test their employer's patience. "Rosalinda," Silas called, and an elderly Mexican woman emerged from the house, her dark eyes taking in Seraphine's tear-stained face with immediate understanding. "At Dios mío," Rosalinda murmured, crossing herself. "Another lost lamb." Silas's jaw tightened at the words, but he said nothing. Instead, he gestured toward the house. "Show her to the blue room. See that she has whatever she needs." "What exactly am I here for?" Serafina asked, finding her voice as they climbed the porch steps. Silas paused, his hand on the doorframe. For a moment, his icy mask slipped, revealing something raw and wounded. "Beneath, to be safe," he said quietly. Nothing more, nothing less. The blue room was simple but comfortable, with lace curtains and a quilt that had been made by loving hands. Rosalinda bustled about, bringing fresh towels and a basin of warm water, her motherly instincts overriding her wariness of Silas's latest acquisition. "He's not what you think," Rosalinda said, as she helped Serafina out of her auction day dress. El Patron has ghosts that haunt him. You remind him of someone who, Rosalinda's weathered hands stilled on the buttons, his wife. Lost her in childbirth 15 years ago, along with their baby. He's been running from that pain ever since. That evening at dinner, Serafina studied her captor across the heavy oak table. Silas ate in silence, his movements precise and controlled. The dining room held traces of feminine touches, delicate china, silver candlesticks, a painting of wildflowers all covered in dust and neglect. You loved her very much, Serafina said suddenly. Silas's fork clattered against his plate. Don't. Name was eyes said don't. His voice cracked like a whip, but Serafina saw the pain beneath the anger. My name is Serafina, she continued softly, and I'm not her ghost. Silas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You'll work in the garden with Rosalinda. Stay away from the hands, stay away from town, and stay away from memories that aren't yours to dig up. After he stormed out, Rosalinda appeared with coffee and understanding eyes. He bought you to save you, Nina. Just like he's bought 3 other girls over the years when they came up for auction. All safely married now, 2 good men he found. For them, Seraphine's heart leaped. He finds them husbands. Some men who will treat them with respect, give them homes and children and love. Rosalinda patted her hand. But you already have love, don't you? I saw the way that golden-haired boy looked at you. Meanwhile, in Whisper Creek, Lysander was making his own plans. He'd spent the evening listening in saloons, learning what he could about Silas Thornwick. The stories were contradictory. Some called him a heartless bastard. Others whispered that he was a guardian angel in disguise. What everyone agreed on was that Silas had money, influence, and a past darker than a moonless night. But Lysander also learned something else. Jedediah. Grimm had been asking questions about both Serafina and the mysterious drifter who'd bought her. That golden boy's got fire in his belly, observed Moses Fletcher, the ancient blacksmith who'd shod horses for 3 generations. Reminds me of myself when I was young and stupid enough to think love could conquer anything, can't it? Lysander asked desperately. Moses's laugh was like rusty hinges. Son, love can move mountains, but first you've got to be smart enough not to get yourself killed trying. As Lysander walked home through the moonlit streets, he didn't notice the shadow following him, with a cruel smile that decorated Jedediah Grimm's scarred face. Dawn brought the sound of horses' hooves thundering. Up the road to Silas's ranch, Serafina rushed to her window and felt her heart stop. Lysander sat astride a magnificent chestnut mare, his golden hair flying like a banner as he rode toward the house with desperate determination. Silas emerged from the barn, his hand resting on his gun belt as he watched the young man approach. Ranch hands gathered behind him, sensing trouble in the morning air. Lysander dismounted in a cloud of dust, his amber eyes blazing with purpose. I've come for Serafina, he announced, his voice carrying across the yard. Have you now? Silas's tone was deceptively calm. And what makes you think she's yours to claim? 'Cause I love her, and she loves me. Lysander stepped forward, unafraid, despite being outnumbered 10-1. I've got money, $50 I've saved working for Grimm. It's not much, but it's honest money, Silas finished, something like respect flickering in his pale eyes. Earned by the sweat of your brow, not stolen at a card table. Serafina couldn't stand it anymore. She burst from the house, her heart singing at the sight of her beloved's face. Lysander. How did you... I followed the road until I found you, he said simply, opening his arms as she ran to him. Told you I'd come. Silas watched their reunion with an expression that was part pain, part longing. Rosalinda appeared at his elbow, her dark eyes soft with understanding. She is not Isabella, she whispered, and he is not you 15 years ago. Let them have what you lost, patron, mate. But before Silas could respond, the sound of approaching riders split the air. A dozen men in black dusters came over the hill, led by a figure that made Seraphine's blood turn to ice water. Jedediah Grimm sat his horse like a king surveying his domain, his scarred face twisted into its perpetual cruel smile. 50. He was still a handsome man, in a vicious way, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes like chips of obsidian. Well, well, Grim drawled as his men formed a semicircle around the ranch yard. Looks like my stable boy's gone and gotten himself into trouble. Lysander stepped protectively in front of Seraphina, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. This has nothing to do with you, Grim. Oh, but it does. Grim's smile widened. You see, you're still under contract to me for another 6 months, and running off without permission violates that contract. I could have you arrested for theft of services. Flissus moved forward, his own men closing ranks behind him. The boy's not on your land anymore, Grim, and neither is the girl. But that's where you're wrong, old friend. Grim pulled a folded paper from his coat. Seems young Lysander here owes me money damages to property, time lost, emotional distress. His debt comes to exactly $300. The number hit like a physical blow. $300, the exact amount Silas had paid for Seraphina at auction. You bastard, Lysander snarled. You planned this. I plan everything, Grim replied smoothly, including what happens next. You see, I'm willing to forgive the debt in exchange for something I want. What? Seraphina demanded, though she already feared the answer. Grim's obsidian eyes fixed on her like a snake watching a mouse. You, my dear. 1 year of service in my household. After that, you'll be free to go wherever you please. The yard fell silent, except for the sound of horses shifting and men breathing. Everyone knew what service in Grim's household really meant. The man collected beautiful things the way other men collected stamps. And he was notorious for discarding them when he grew bored. Never, Seraphina said, her voice ringing with defiance. Then your golden boy goes to prison? Grim shrugged. I hear the territorial penitentiary is particularly unpleasant this time of year. Lysander's face went white. A year in prison would kill him. He was too gentle, too trusting to survive among hardened criminals. There has to be another way. Seraphina whispered. Silas stepped forward, his hand on his gun. There is... Grim, you want to settle this like men? Just you and me? Winner takes all? Grim's laugh was like breaking glass. How delightfully old-fashioned, but I think not. I prefer my victories assured. He raised his hand and his men drew their weapons in perfect unison. The standoff stretched like a held breath, 12 guns against 6. With love hanging in the balance, the morning sun beat down mercilessly as two groups of armed men faced each other across the dusty ranch yard. Seraphina felt her world balanced on a knife's edge. Her heart torn between the man she loved and the mysterious drifter who'd become her unlikely protector. This is madness, Rosalinda whispered from the porch, her weathered hands clutching her rosary. Silas stood like a statue carved from granite, his pale eyes calculating odds and angles. At his back, 5 loyal ranch hands waited for his word, their faces grim but determined. They'd follow him into hell if he asked, such was the strange loyalty the cold drifter inspired. I have a counter-proposal, Silas said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Grim raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. I'm listening. A contest. Your best man against mine. Winner takes the girl and the boy walks free. And if I win, then you get what you came for. Silas replied flatly. Lysander stepped forward, his amber eyes blazing. I'll fight for her. No, Silas said without looking at him. This isn't your fight, boy. The hell it isn't. Lysander's voice cracked with emotion. She's everything to me. Grim's cruel laughter filled the air. How touching. What? Thornwick's proposal with one modification. I choose the contest. A horse race. From here to Devil's Canyon and back. First man across the finish line wins. Seraphine's heart sank. Devil's Canyon was a treacherous 15-mile ride through rocky terrain and dangerous switchbacks. Men had died making that journey at normal speeds, let alone racing. And your champion? Silas asked. Grim's smile was all teeth and malice. Why, myself, of course. I've been riding these hills for 20 years, and my stallion Nightshade has never lost a race. Done, Silas said immediately. Wait, Seraphina grabbed his arm. You don't understand, Grim knows every rock, every turn. He's gotten men killed. On that trail, just for sport. Silas looked down at her, and for a moment his icy mask slipped completely. She saw exhaustion in his pale eyes, and something that might have been hope. "Some things are worth dying for," he said quietly. "Not me," she whispered desperately. "I'm not worth your life. You remind me of someone who meant everything to me once," Silas replied, his voice barely audible. "Maybe it's time I stopped." Running from that memory. An hour later, the two men sat their horses at the makeshift starting line. Silas rode a magnificent black stallion named Tempest, while Grimm's mount Nightshade pawed the ground like a creature from the pit itself. The entire population of the ranch had gathered to watch, along with several of Grimm's men who'd ridden out to witness their boss's victory. Lysander stood beside Seraphina, his hand gripping hers so tightly it hurt.
"I'm ready, gentlemen,"
called out Moses Fletcher, who'd been summoned from town to serve as official starter. The old blacksmith held a red bandana high above his head. Both riders nodded grimly. "Go." The bandana dropped, and both horses exploded forward in a thunder of hoofbeats and flying dust. They pounded down the valley road, neck and neck. Their riders bent low over their mounts' necks. Seraphina watched until they disappeared around the first bend, then sank onto the porch steps as if her strings had been cut. Lysander sat beside her, his young face aged by worry. "He'll win," Lysander said, though his voice lacked conviction. "He has to win." But in her heart, Seraphina feared they'd just watched a good man ride to his death for her sake. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent weeks resenting Silas for buying her, and now she was praying desperately for his safe return. "Tell me about her," she said suddenly. "The woman I remind you of." Rosalinda settled beside them with a heavy sigh. "Isabella Martinez. Beautiful as a sunrise, gentle as morning rain. They met when she was 18 and he was 30. She was working as a seamstress to support her sick mother." "What happened?" Love, Rosalinda said simply. Pure, honest love that made Silas believe in miracles again. They married, built this ranch together, dreamed of children and grandchildren and growing old watching sunsets from this very porch. Lysander's grip on Seraphine's hand tightened. And then the baby came early. Isabella labored for 2 days before. Rosalinda crossed herself. They died within an hour of each other, mother and child. The house and hasn't spoken Isabella's name since. In the distance, a church bell tolled noon. The race had been going for 2 hours. There was still no sign of either rider. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks when the sound of a single horse's hooves echoed across the valley. Every eye strained toward the trail that led back from Devil's Canyon, hearts hammering as they waited to see which rider would emerge. Seraphina stood frozen on the porch steps, Lysander's hand gripping hers like a lifeline. The suspense was unbearable. Their entire future hung on which man would round that distant bend. "There!" shouted one of Grimm's riders, pointing toward a cloud of dust on the horizon. A lone horse and rider appeared, moving at a steady canter, rather than the desperate gallop they'd expected. As the figure drew closer, Seraphina felt her heart leap into her throat. It was Silas. But he was slumped in his saddle, and his black stallion Tempest was favoring his left foreleg. Behind them, being led by a rope, came Grimm's riderless horse Nightshade. "Dios mio!" Celinda breathed, rushing down the steps as Silas swayed dangerously. Lysander reached him first, catching the older man as he slid from his saddle. Silas's face was pale as death, and blood seeped through his shirt from a gash along his ribs. "Grimm?" Seraphina asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Dead," Silas gasped, wincing as Lysander helped him toward the house. "Rockslide in Devil's Canyon. Tried to warn him, but..." He shook his head weakly. "Pride killed him, same as it kills most men." The remaining members of Grimm's gang exchanged uncertain glances. With their leader dead and no clear successor, they seemed suddenly lost, like sheep without a shepherd. "We'll be heading back to town," their spokesman finally announced. "No point in staying where we're not wanted." As they rode away, Seraphina felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Grimm's death meant Lysander's fictional debt died with him, and there would be no more threats or schemes to separate them. But their relief was short-lived. As Rosalinda tended to Silas's wounds, his breathing became increasingly labored. The gash in his side was deeper than it had first appeared, and he'd lost a dangerous amount of blood during the long ride home. The Dr. Serafina said urgently. Someone needs to fetch Dr. Holbrook from town. Already sent Joaquin, Rosalinda replied, her dark eyes troubled. But it's a 4-hour ride each way. I don't know if ... She didn't finish the sentence, but they all understood. Silas might not have for hours as evening shadows lengthened across the ranch. Serafina sat beside the drifter's bed, gently bathing his fevered brow with cool water. Lysander paced the room like a caged wolf, his golden hair disheveled and his face drawn with worry. Why did he do it? Lysander asked for the dozenth time. Why risk his life for us? 'Cause he loved someone once. Serafina replied softly, her eyes never leaving Silas's pale face. And losing her broke something inside him that never healed. Silas stirred, his pale eyes fluttering open. For a moment, he seemed confused, as if he wasn't sure where he was or what had happened. Isabella, he whispered, his voice weak as a child's. Seraphine's heart clenched. No, it's Serafina. You're home, Silas. You won the race. A memory returned. To his eyes, along with a flicker of his old hardness, grim, dead. You saved us. Silas tried to sit up, then fell back with a groan. The papers, ... in my desk, ... third drawer. Rest now, Serafina soothed. Whatever it is can wait. No. His grip on her wrist was surprisingly strong. A marriage certificate, ... Sign it, ... Both of you. Lysander stopped pacing. What? Makes it legal? Silas gasped. No one can, ... separate you, ... if you're married. Serafina felt tears. Stinger eyes. Even now, even dying, he was trying to protect them. We will, she promised, but you're going to be fine. The doctor will. Doctor can't fix. A broken heart, Silas whispered. Been trying for ... 15 years. His eyes closed again, and his breathing became shallow and rapid. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising one of the violent storms that sometimes swept through the valley. But inside the house, 3 people waited and prayed and hoped that love in all its forms might prove stronger than death. Dr. Holbrook arrived just after midnight, his black bag clutched in one hand and his rain-soaked coat dripping onto Rosalinda's clean floors. The storm had broken during his journey from town, turning the roads into muddy rivers and making the 4-hour ride stretch into 6 harrowing hours. How long has he been unconscious? Doctor asked, immediately setting to work examining Silas's wounds. 2 hours, Serafina replied, not moving from her chair beside the bed. She'd maintained her vigil throughout the long evening, bathing Silas's fevered brow and listening to his labored breathing. Dr. Holbrook, a portly man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, worked in methodical silence. He cleaned and restitched the gash, checked for signs of internal bleeding, and administered a dose of laudanum for the pain. He's lost a lot of blood, the doctor finally pronounced. And there may be internal injuries I can't detect. The next 24 hours will tell the tale. Lysander, who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped forward. But he'll live. Dr. Holbrook's expression was grave. I've seen men recover from worse, and I've seen men die from less. Silas is strong, but he's also carrying wounds that go deeper than flesh. As if summoned by their voices, Silas stirred. His pale eyes opened, clearer now than they'd been hours earlier. Doc, he whispered, his voice still weak but steady. Good. You made it. You stubborn fool, Dr. Holbrook scolded gently, racing through Devil's Canyon at your age. What were you thinking? Silas's gaze found Seraphine's face, and something like peace settled over his features. I was thinking about second chances. The doctor finished his work and promised to return in the morning, leaving detailed instructions with Rosalinda about care and medication. As his buggy disappeared into the stormy night, an odd silence settled over the house. The papers, Silas said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been all day. Did you find them? Lysander nodded, producing a leather portfolio from the desk. Inside were various legal documents, including a blank marriage certificate that bore the official seal of Colorado Territory. Sign it, Silas urged. Both of you, Rosalinda, can witness. Serafina looked at Lysander, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his amber eyes. They'd dreamed of marriage, planned for it. But somehow it had always seemed like something that would happen in the future, when they had money and stability and her father's blessing. It's not how I imagined it, she said softly. Nothing ever is, Silas replied. But love doesn't wait for perfect circumstances. Trust me on that. Lysander took the pen first, his hand steady as he signed his name in careful script. Then he offered it to Serafina, his eyes never leaving her face. Will you have me? He asked formally, as if they were standing in a church instead of a sick man's bedroom during a thunderstorm. Until death do us part, she replied, taking the pen and adding her signature below his. Rosalinda signed as witness, her weathered face beaming with joy despite the circumstances. Felicitades, she exclaimed, kissing both young people on their cheeks. You are married now, officially and forever. The storm outside seemed to quiet, as if in acknowledgement of the moment. Serafina and Lysander stood hand in hand beside Silas's bed, their fingers intertwined and their hearts full of hope for the future. There's something else, Silas said, reaching for another document from the portfolio. Deed to the ranch. I have no heirs, no family left. Should go to someone who will love this land the way Isabella and I did. Silas, no, Serafina protested. We can't. You can and you will, he said firmly. Consider it a wedding gift. This place needs laughter again, needs children running through the halls and hope growing in the garden. As dawn broke clear and bright after the storm, painting the valley in shades of gold and green, the newlyweds sat on either side of their benefactor's bed. Silas slept peacefully now, his color improved and his breathing easier. Do you think he'll recover? Lysander asked quietly. Serafina watched the steady rise and fall of Silas's chest, remembering the broken man who'd bought her at auction and the hero who'd risked everything to give them their freedom. I think, she said carefully, that some wounds can only be healed by helping others heal theirs. Outside, the ranch hands were already about their morning chores, and smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. Life continued, as it always did. But now it contained the promise of something new and wonderful. 3 months later, the valley blazed with autumn colors as Serafina stood in the kitchen garden, her hands dirty from harvesting the last of the season's vegetables. The wedding ring on her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to Lysander's grandmother, caught the afternoon sunlight as she worked. Mrs. Vale, called a familiar voice, and she turned to see Silas approaching from the barn, his color fully restored and his step strong. The near-death experience had changed him in ways that went beyond physical healing. The icy mask was gone, replaced by something warmer and more human. Mr. Thornwick, she replied with mock formality, then broke into a grin.
Ow.
Though I keep telling. You two call me Serafina. It's old habits, he chuckled, settling onto the garden bench they'd built together the month before. Where's that husband of yours? Breaking the new stallion you bought from the Morrison Ranch. Serafina wiped her hands on her apron and joined him on the bench. He has a gift with horses. They trust him instantly. Silas nodded approvingly. Since his recovery, he'd thrown himself into teaching Lysander everything about ranch management, treating the young man like the son he'd never had. The arrangement worked perfectly. Lysander had the energy and intuition needed for the day-to-day operations, while Silas provided experience and wisdom. There's something I need to tell you both, Silas said, his expression growing serious. I've been doing some thinking these past months. Serafina felt her heart skip. Was he going to take back the ranch? Leave them to find his own way again? I want to build a house, he continued. Nothing fancy, just a small place on the hill where Isabella's buried. Somewhere I can watch the sunsets and remember the good times instead of just the pain. Relief flooded through her. That sounds wonderful. But you know you'll always have a place here, don't you? This is your home too. I know. Silas smiled, and it transformed his entire face. But newlyweds need their privacy, and old bachelors need their solitude. Besides, I have other plans. Before Serafina could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Lysander's return. He cantered into the yard on the new Stellina magnificent bay, with a white star on his forehead, his golden hair flying like a banner, and his face glowing with triumph. "Copper's ready for anything now," he announced, dismounting with fluid grace. "He'll make a fine addition to the herd." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching another spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Silas revealed his other plans. "I'm thinking of opening a school," he said quietly. "This valley's growing, families moving in, children who need education. Isabella always wanted to teach." Serafina reached over and squeezed his weathered hand. "She'd be proud of you," maybe Silas mused. "Took me long enough to figure out that the best way to honor the dead is to help the living." Over the following months, the valley transformed. Silas's school opened in a small building next to the church, with him serving as both teacher and headmaster. Word spread of the excellent education available in their remote corner of Colorado, and more families arrived each month. The ranch prospered under Lysander's careful management and Silas's guidance. They expanded the herd, improved the grazing land, and built a reputation for raising the finest horses in 3 counties. But the greatest change came the following spring. When Serafina announced she was expecting their first child, joy was almost childlike in its intensity. He immediately began planning additions to the house and ordering books about child-rearing from Denver. Uncle Silas Lysander teased one evening as they watched the older man rock a wooden cradle he'd crafted by hand. "It's a nice ring to it." The baby arrived in late summer, a daughter, with Seraphine's emerald eyes and Lysander's golden hair. They named her Isabella, and when Silas first held her in his arms, tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." As the years passed, the valley filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the bustle of growing prosperity. Serafina and Lysander had 3 more children, 1 boy and another daughter, while Silas became the beloved patriarch of an extended family that included half the valley's residents. On his 70th birthday, as they gathered for a celebration that spilled from the house into the yard and beyond, Silas looked around at the faces of all the people who'd become his family. 45 years ago, he said, raising a glass of Rosalinda's famous punch, "I thought my story was over, thought I'd lost everything worth having. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another." He looked at Serafina, now a confident mother of 4, and at Lysander, who'd grown into a respected leader in their community. "Thank you," he said simply, "for showing an old fool that it's never too late for a second chance at happiness." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson, 3 generations of the extended family that had grown from one broken man's act of redemption gathered on the porch to watch the end of another perfect day. The drifter had indeed bought her from the auctioneer, and she had loved the pretty stable boy instead. But in the end, love had proved large enough to encompass them all, creating a family bound not by blood but by choice, sacrifice, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserved a chance at happiness. And in the cemetery on the hill beneath, a headstone that read, "Isabella Martinez Thornwick, beloved wife and mother."
Oh!
Wildflowers bloomed eternal, tended by loving hands that had finally learned to honor the past while embracing the future.